All right, so before we get started, I'll go ahead and tell you a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Tennessee and grew up in a pretty country part of Tennessee. So outdoors living was just part of life. And my heritage is Tennessee. Had moonshiners and coal miners in my family. And so when I grew up in Tennessee, we just playing outside, building shelters, hunting, fishing, that's just part of life. So I joined the Tennessee Army National Guard when I was 17, deployed to Iraq when I was 19, did a year in Iraq with our military, and got out of the military in 2010, and kind of found outdoors wilderness survival as my outlet. I am classified as a disabled veteran, so it's good to have that form of therapy for me, I guess you could say. It's a good outlet, and men really do good with having activities to keep us occupied, men and women. And so, so that's kind of some of my experience in, I guess, professional training or real life experience. I've been practicing wilderness survival skills for over 4 years. I've had a YouTube channel for 2 years, and these are many of my resources that I've used to study and go out into the woods and practice and find different resources and just kind of challenge and test myself. I did recently apply to be on the TV show Alone. I don't know if you've ever seen that on the History Channel. Not got a call yet, but I did apply to be on it. So that's kind of where my direction is that I'm headed. So what we're going to go over is mostly wilderness survival theory. There's just so many things that we can go over in a classroom setting when more of the things of wilderness survival are outdoors. So some things I can just talk about or try to demonstrate, but you kind of really have to get outside to get the full experience of doing these skills. So when it comes to wilderness survival theory, the first time that you realize that you're lost, what happens in most scenarios is that people panic and they run around trying to find back to their trail where they had gotten off of, and they only get themselves more lost and in a worse situation. And so the first key is that you need to first decide if you're going to stay where you're at and wait for someone to find you, or if you're going to go and try to self-rescue. Most of the time we recommend not doing self-rescue unless you are highly skilled and have resources on you. Because if you do not have resources, then you have to supplement resources with knowledge. And if you don't know how to make a flint knife and you don't have one on you, it's going to be pretty tough. So your best case scenario is to stay put, and most survival scenarios are resolved within 48 hours in today's world. They tend to train for 72 hours, but 48 hours is the time that it is typically resolved. And also some warnings. The two biggest threats of not getting found or not surviving a survival scenario is hypothermia and hyperthermia and hypothermia. One's overheating, one's getting too cold, and not being able to regulate your body temperature. So that can be done by making a microclimate to better control that atmosphere that you're in. That can be things like shelters, fire, your clothes that you have on, getting under trees, things of that nature. You can even collect natural debris such as leaves and dirt that you could pile up around yourself to help trap your body heat. Those things can be very useful in a cold weather environment. Typically here in Texas, we don't necessarily have the cold weather issue. It's more so staying well hydrated in hot weather. So a couple of things on like shelter material. You can carry things as simple as 55-gallon drum liners that you could split in and cut open the bottom, cut across the top, and you can make a fly to offer shade. It takes up no space, no weight. You can also use these collecting water. You can use them as ground mats to combat the soil or the ground sucking out your body heat. It's something I think can sometimes get overlooked that you can carry in your kit, carry in your car, and can really help a great deal when it comes to sustaining yourself in survival. As well as something like a bivvy or an emergency space blanket. where this one here is bright orange on one side and has the space blanket on the other. So with the bright orange color on the outside, it helps with signaling. So if someone is flying over above to look for you, or as at a higher vantage point, the bright orange contrasts the woodland environment, and the space blanket of the silver reflects your body heat a great deal to help keep you warm. As you can see here on the picture, they wrap themselves up in it together as a team. They get their body heat from one another, as well as just having the blanket around them is creating a microclimate where they're controlling the temperature of the area. Also, another tip to keep in mind when it comes to signaling is 3 large X's. If you set up a fly of some sort, whether it be a lean-to or anything of that nature, I'll try to draw you a little bit of a diagram here. So you have a tree set up and you run a ridge line across. You have your tarp spread out and staked down. If you put 3 large X's on the back, what this symbol is for is I can no longer proceed. It means you're stuck there. So when a helicopter is flying over top, if you have a bright orange contrast, the 3 large X's, it says I can't go on, I need help. Compared to somebody who just has a fly set up and is camping. So this is more an emergency situation, I need your help, than just going camping on a regular outing. So that's something to keep in mind. Let's see, as well as on signaling, I tend to carry a couple of things with me. A bright orange t-shirt, you can get these really cheap at Walmart, I think $2. You know, just a bright orange t-shirt, whether you ever wear it or not, just throw in the bottom of your pack in case you really find yourself lost. It's something that contrasts your colors against the woods, so it makes it a little easier for you to be seen. As well as, I carry a ShamWow, so it's got some great benefits because one, it's bright orange, but it also works good as a towel if I need to dry off from getting wet. Also, there's another guy that I have watched that he puts this out in the morning, and the morning dew, this will actually absorb the morning dew to where you can strain it out into a cup and get a fresh glass of water just from putting out a ShamWow. And if you're really lost, and something like that's helping your signaling and also helping hydrate yourself. And those things are going to be really important. Let's see, I'm going to just jump over to the back because we're kind of on that topic. The rule of 3s. Okay, the rule of 3s is that you can go 3 minutes without air. The average human underwater, 3 minutes without air, that's typically as long as an individual can go. 3 hours without shelter, and that's in different climate changes. So say if it's raining and you're sitting there, depending on the temperature, it's usually 65 degrees, and you're sitting in constant rain, within 3 hours, hypothermia starts to set in. Even though you may not feel freezing, you can still be hypothermic. 3 days without water, and that's as long as we can go. So, and then 3 weeks without food. So when it comes to your priorities, once you've discovered that you are lost and that you are going to set up a camp and that you need to survive, then your priorities should be make sure you have air, making sure you have a shelter, then your water and fire. And those two can interchange, because if you don't have purified water from, say you brought it with you, or you're collecting it from a rain source or a natural spring, then that means you're going to have to purify that water in some way. Whether that be a filter, which there's plenty of really good filters out now that are very inexpensive, or by boiling it, which is what I always do. Boiling is the only method that's proven to kill 100% of all bacteria in the water source. So you can really, if you had to collect some pretty rough looking water, if you filtered it through a bandana, which I have one in my bag over there, run it through a bandana, collect it in your metal container, and then boil it. Though it may not look the greatest, it's perfectly sterilized and you can drink it. And so drinking some not pleasant looking water and surviving is far better than the alternative. All right, so laws of thermodynamics. So some science plays into this quite a bit, more than people probably think. So laws of thermodynamics are conduction, convection, and radiation. These are the way that heat and air travel, heat and cold travel. So conduction is when something touches your skin and it affects your body temperature. So that can be as simple as, say, grabbing a hot coal from a fire or a block of ice touching you. And that can affect your body temperature. As well as convection, when something moves over you and affects your temperature. So radiation is when something is producing that heat or that cool air that is affecting your temperature. I have some examples there on these. Say here in Texas, where it gets quite hot. If you're overheating, you can lay down in a running stream, and the stream running over you will, over a period of time, help cool you down. Or simply by taking your clothes, soaking them into the water, and putting them on will help cool you down as well. Radiation, tends to be more of a benefit in cold weather temperatures, and that's when you've got your fire built and the radiant waves of heat that come off that fire that affect your body temperature as well. And then with building a shelter, you're trapping that heat wave to control your climate in that smaller area. So that brings us to fire building. Three main things that you have to have a fire is heat, fuel, oxygen. And so what I have seen most often when I take people out and I teach them some of these skills, all the way from young boys to grown men, is they always smother the fire. It's much harder to build a fire out in nature than it is to throw in some newspaper in your fireplace. It's totally different when you're collecting your natural materials. And so what happens most often is people grab the tinder, which is the smallest, finest materials that you can find. Typically a bird nest would be an ideal fire tinder. Not that you want to take a nest that a bird is living in. I definitely wouldn't recommend that. But if it's life or death, you do what you have to do. But things around like this area, we have tons of juniper or cedar trees. That bark is perfect for tinder. So you can scrape that off the side of it by grabbing it into your hands and just processing it in a circular motion. You can really break that up into much finer fibers that will hold a spark quite easily. And so you can use things like ferrocerium rods. I have multiple sizes and types of these. This one I made a handle that is fat wood, which is a high resinous pine wood. This one I just made a handle out of duct tape. This one I bought, it has a compass and a whistle already attached to it. So there's tons of different types of ferro rods, and that's just a mixture of different kinds of metals. When it's struck on something that has a sharp edge, it'll just throw a shower of sparks. So if you've processed a tinder, like I said with the juniper and cedar, when you throw the sparks on it, it should catch that spark fairly easy and be able to ignite into a flame quite easily. And that would move you into your next step of the fire building, which is your kindling. And so your kindling, you want to be your pinky or smaller in a woodland environment. When you're in your home and you've got tons of cardboard and newspaper crammed in there, you can throw good-sized sticks in there and it'll take okay. With the draft and everything else that affects that. When you're in a woodland environment, it's a completely different situation. And none of that applies. Do you have something you want to add?
What if it's pouring down raining?
Yeah, if it's pouring down rain, then what you want to do is try to find an area underneath a log or a tree that's already down, that's already dry, that you can at least get it started. And then if you can, you use a means of transferring it to somewhere else where you have a tarp set up. And you usually want it, I would say 6 feet if it were me, and you're using a plastic type tarp or something that is not a non-flammable, like a lot of canvases are treated to be non-flammable. That way, if you can get your shelter up first, then build your fire underneath. You want to collect your materials on the bottom side of down logs or the side of the tree, like say cedars, where they have tons of overhang, tons of branches. A lot of that inner stuff is going to be dry. So even if you scrape off the bark, the inside, the inner bark, will still be dry. So you just have to do a little more work to find your dry materials. when you do your kindling, you want it to be pinky size or smaller, and you want a lot of this stuff, because this is what's going to make your initial bed of coals and to grab your initial flame to help it get going to ignite your next level, which is fuel. And that's the thing that's going to be the size of your thumb or larger. So when you are initially got your tinder ignited to flame through a spark of some sort, and then you get your kindling going, you want a lot of kindling, and then be a little slower on putting your fuel on. Like I had said before, most people, they end up smothering the fire before it ever takes, and that's because they put the fuel on too fast and they don't put enough kindling on. And so the fuel never really takes, and it robs the fire of the oxygen, so you don't ever get a fire going. And if it were me and I was lost in the woods, fire is going to be my priority, especially in this kind of environment. It doesn't really get really cold. So a fire, even if I had to sleep directly beside it with nothing over top of me, I could stay warm. And I have to have fire to sterilize water. So in my opinion, fire is first priority for me. Main thing is going to be getting out in nature and practicing these skills. These are skills you're interested in learning, because you don't want to go on a day hike or an overnight camp and find yourself in a real scenario where you're lost and not know how to build a fire, or not know if you're proficient in building a fire. A lot of times people will watch YouTube or TV shows and never actually go out and practice the skill and maybe build a bag. I've taken many guys out that have a BOB bag or a bug out bag or 72-hour bag, and they have never used any of the items in it. And I took a guy out one time who was a homesteader. He had a great set house going, and he could live off of just his house. But if he had to leave his house for whatever reason and take his bag, everything that was in there was in brand new wrappers, and he had never touched any of it. And so I said, well, let's go use this stuff. Let me show you how it works, and we can find out what does work for you and what doesn't. And a lot of times he was just overpacked. That's something I've seen too. You carry a lot of things that you think you need that aren't really a necessity. And so take your pack out if you have a bug out bag or a 72-hour bag, and go out and try it. See if it works for you. Get rid of items that you don't really need and put other things in that are more beneficial to your skill set. I tend to carry books with me, whether it be wild edible plants or medicinal plants. I'll carry them with me when I go out, so that when I set up camp, I'm looking and foraging for new plants, just to constantly be learning, or to try and taste it, to see if I'm allergic to it, see if it works for me. There is a time that I cut myself really good with a knife that I probably should have got stitches on, but I knew a wild plant that was a medicinal to clot blood and also prevented infection. So I packed it with that wild plant, put some gauze over top of it, and I never went to the doctor. Scarred up perfectly, had no issues at all. By having more of a knowledge of wild plants, in my opinion, they're a very useful resource. Never know when you're going to need them or be able to use them. And they were used for quite a long time before the chemicals and the pills and all that stuff became so popular. All right, so anybody have any questions so far?
Could you spell the name of that rod?
Ferro rod, F-E-R-R-O-R-O-D. This one here is what I would recommend, because if I'm going to go ahead and buy one, I'd rather just have to buy one. And this one is 5 inches long and is a 1/2 inch thick. And it came from China. I know some people maybe aren't so proud of all of that. You can get one from firesteels.com that are more American made, but they cost more. So this one was $8, and it took me about a month to get it. Then the firesteels.com are $25. And you just pick and choose which you think works best for you. This one, I got 4 kids, so if I can get something for $8 compared to $20, I'm going with $8. And I've used this. This is one that I don't think I'll ever have to replace unless I lose it. And it didn't have a handle on it, so they tend to charge you quite a bit for the handle and the drilling. So I just took some Gorilla duct tape, wrapped a layer around, tied a piece of line to where it came out the other side and kept wrapping the duct tape around to where I had something to grip onto and holds my lanyard really well as well. And also duct tape is flammable and will ignite off of a ferrule.